In an arid Texas desert, scientists and ecologists made a bold decision, releasing 5,000 bison into an ecosystem that hadn't seen these majestic creatures in over a century. The idea behind the project was to restore lost biodiversity and observe how a large herbivore could influence the regeneration of the landscape. The initial expectation was that the process would be gradual, requiring decades for the bison to significantly change the terrain. However, what happened exceeded all predictions. Subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any of our videos about the most shocking secrets of nature and surprising ecological transformations. During the first few months, the massive presence of the bison generated an immediate and dramatic impact. These animals began to move across the desert, plowing the ground with their powerful hooves and eating large amounts of tough vegetation. This initially caused an apparent imbalance, with areas devastated by the animals' pressure on existing flora. Traditional grasslands were reduced, shrubs were knocked down, and patches of bare earth began to appear. To observers, the desert seemed to be in chaos, and some experts feared the experiment might fail. However, this initial destruction was part of a natural process that few humans had witnessed before. The bison were not only feeding, but also removing the surface layer of the soil, promoting the germination of new seeds and facilitating the dispersion of nutrients. Their grazing and trampling behavior created microhabitats that allowed resilient plant species to begin establishing themselves in areas that were previously arid and infertile. Scientists recorded that even in areas where vegetation had been almost eliminated, shoots of native grass and flowers began to appear a few months after the animals were released. Another key factor was the interaction between bison and local fauna. The presence of these large herbivores attracted natural predators, such as coyotes and birds of prey, who found new hunting opportunities. Furthermore, birds began to disperse seeds in the areas modified by the bison, accelerating the regeneration of the flora. This cascade effect demonstrated how a single change in the ecosystem could trigger rapid and profound transformations, something that traditional ecological theory considered extremely slow. During the first year, researchers observed that the bison population density adjusted naturally. The animals distributed themselves according to resource availability, avoiding overpopulation in specific areas and allowing previously degraded areas to begin recovering. This ecological self-regulation was one of the first surprises of the project, showing that bison not only modify the terrain, but also contribute to a dynamic natural balance. Scientists began to notice changes in the soils themselves. The action of the bison, combined with the deposition of nutrient-rich manure, improved soil fertility, increasing the land's ability to support more diverse and resilient plants. The microbial composition of the soil also changed, with an increase in beneficial bacteria and fungi, creating an environment more conducive to the regeneration of native grasslands and shrubs. This phenomenon, called large herbivore ecological engineering, had been observed before, but never on such a massive scale and with such rapid results. At the same time, the bison altered the hydrology of the desert. Their movements and trampling helped create small channels and depressions that retain water during rains, reducing erosion and allowing temporary ponds to form that benefit amphibians, reptiles, and migratory birds. In other words, the bison were not only transforming the physical landscape, but also modifying the flow of water and promoting biodiversity comprehensively. However, the ecosystem's initial reaction was not entirely positive. In the first few months, vulnerable species such as small rodents and grassland birds suffered losses due to trampling and intense grazing. This led to debates among conservationists about whether human intervention through the reintroduction of bison could cause irreversible damage. Despite this, researchers maintained the long-term perspective. The initial destruction is part of the restoration cycle, and the true ecological transformation would be measured in years, not months. Throughout the second year, surprising results began to be observed. Previously arid areas began to regenerate quickly, resilient grasses grew abundantly, and changes in the diversity of native plants were noted. The positive effects of the bison's trampling and grazing began to outweigh the initial negative impacts, transforming what seemed like an ecological disaster into a process of rapid and effective renewal. Furthermore, the interaction between bison and plant species allowed rare and endangered plants to recover spaces they had lost during decades of desert degradation. This led scientists to question traditional conservation models, which generally consider the recovery of degraded ecosystems to be an extremely slow process, taking decades or even centuries. The Texas case showed that large-scale restoration can happen much faster when key herbivores are reintroduced into the appropriate ecosystem. Just into the second year after the release of the 5,000 bison, the Texas desert landscape began to show changes that seemed impossible. What were previously extensive areas of arid land and scattered shrubs turned into green fields and dense grasslands in a matter of months. The regeneration of the flora was so fast that it surprised the scientists who had planned the project with a recovery horizon of several decades in mind. Comment, Bison, if you believe that nature can regenerate faster than we ever imagined with the help of keystone species. The bison continued to exert their influence on the ecosystem through selective grazing, soil trampling, and manure deposition, promoting a virtuous cycle of natural fertilization and seed dispersal. Every movement of the animals facilitated the germination of native grasses and flowers, creating a mosaic of vegetation that attracted pollinating insects, birds, and small mammals. The diversity of the ecosystem began to increase notably, exceeding researchers' expectations and generating a new ecological balance. A key effect of the massive reintroduction of bison was the recovery of species that were believed to be almost extinct in the region. Animals like hares, foxes, and certain grassland birds found refuge in the dense grasses that emerged thanks to controlled grazing. Even predators, such as coyotes and birds of prey, began to proliferate as they found a more stable supply of prey. This showed that the positive impact of the bison extended throughout the food chain, contributing to a much more balanced and resilient ecosystem. The transformation of the terrain also affected local hydrology. The movements of the bison helped form small depressions and temporary ponds that retained rainwater, reducing erosion and increasing the availability of moisture for plants and animals. These ponds served as temporary habitats for amphibians and reptiles, allowing their reproduction and contributing to an overall increase in biodiversity. Scientists were surprised to see how the action of a single group of herbivores could modify water flow patterns and promote life in an arid environment. One of the most impactful discoveries was the speed with which the grasslands began to expand. Researchers noted that vegetation density doubled in less than 2 years, a result that challenged any previous ecological restoration model. Furthermore, many rare or endangered plants began to establish themselves again, benefiting from the fertilized soil and the protection provided by the bison. This phenomenon confirmed that ecosystem restoration can be significantly accelerated through the reintroduction of keystone species, an approach that could revolutionize conservation methods. The social behavior of the bison also contributed to the project's success. The animals naturally organized themselves into herds that efficiently traversed the territory, avoiding overpopulation in certain areas and ensuring that pressure on the soil was uniformly distributed. This ecological self-regulation was crucial for the ecosystem to adapt to the massive presence of herbivores without suffering irreversible damage. Soil studies revealed equally impressive changes. The combined action of trampling and manure increased the levels of essential nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, creating a much more fertile substrate for vegetation. Even the soil microbiota was transformed, with an increase in beneficial bacteria and fungi that contribute to the decomposition of organic matter and the healthy growth of plants. This interaction between bison, soil, and vegetation represents a real-life example of large-scale ecological engineering, where a single group of herbivores can trigger rapid and sustainable regeneration. As the ecosystem stabilized, scientists began to observe surprising behavioral patterns in the bison. The animals selected certain areas for repeated grazing, allowing others to recover, which helped maintain a balance between vegetation and fauna. This strategic grazing, combined with the dispersion of seeds through their manure, accelerated the regeneration of native grasses and tough shrubs, creating a more diverse and resilient landscape than the original. Another unexpected effect was the recovery of wildlife that had disappeared due to desert degradation. Birds, insects, and small mammals found refuge in the new grasslands, while predators found a constant supply of food. This allowed biodiversity to increase throughout the region, demonstrating that the reintroduction of a keystone species can activate a positive domino effect throughout the entire ecosystem. Researchers were also surprised to see how the bison helped prevent soil erosion. Their footprints created micro-reliefs that retained water and sediments, preventing heavy rains from washing away the newly formed fertile soil. Furthermore, these natural depressions became small temporary wetlands, offering essential habitats for amphibians and reptiles that previously could not survive in the arid desert. Upon analyzing the results, scientists concluded that the project not only restored vegetation and fauna, but also rewrote the way ecological conservation is understood. The bison demonstrated that human intervention, when combined with keystone species and careful planning, can produce much faster and more effective results than traditional models predict. Ultimately, what began as a bold experiment in the Texas desert became an unprecedented success story in ecological restoration. The 5,000 bison not only survived, but completely transformed the desert, creating dense grasslands, increasing biodiversity, improving soil fertility, and modifying local hydrology. In less than 2 years, the desert seemed to have been reborn, defying all scientific expectations and offering an invaluable lesson on the power of nature and the importance of keystone species in ecosystem restoration. The story of this experiment reminds us that, when nature is allowed to run its course with strategic human support, the results can exceed even the most optimistic predictions, turning what seemed like an arid desert into a vibrant landscape full of life, resilience, and possibilities for future ecological restorations worldwide. Share this video with someone who loves wildlife and conservation projects, so they can see how 5,000 bison completely changed a Texas desert.